Learning how to fake a ghost photo in Photoshop is much easier than trying to catch a real one. I'm Abby Esparza with Envato Tuts Plus, and while I've never seen a real ghost, I have made quite a few creepy images in Photoshop over the past 10 years, most of them using the same techniques we're about to dive into. All of the resources used here today can be found over on Envato Elements, where you can get unlimited downloads of graphics, photos, and fonts, millions of creative digital assets with simple commercial licensing. Let's get right into creating our ghost effect. We're going to start things off with a pretty intense color grade, consisting of 6 adjustment layers. We want to make sure all of these adjustment layers stay at the top of our layer stack, so I do suggest placing them all in a group that you can easily toggle on and off, or lock if you need to. So first up, we have a color lookup adjustment layer set to Horror Blue, Multiply, and a opacity of 50%. Second, a color lookup adjustment layer set to Film Stock 50, keeping the layer mode set to Normal, and an opacity of 20%. Third, another color lookup adjustment layer set to Kodak 5218, Kodak 2383, keeping it set to Normal at around a 50 to 48% opacity. Fourth, a color lookup adjustment layer set to Tension Green this time, set to Multiply, and an opacity of 30%. And now we have a selective color adjustment layer set to what you see here. You can go ahead and pause to get a closer look. And finally, a gradient map adjustment layer set to a black to white gradient and a 30% opacity. This will give us a deep and dark fall-inspired color grade. Now, onto our ghost. First, go ahead and extract your subject using your preferred method. I like to use the pen tool personally, but whatever works best. Once your subject is extracted, select the layer and right-click Convert to Smart Object. Now we can go to Image, Adjustments, Brightness Contrast, and set it to a brightness of -41. Since we set the layer to a smart object beforehand, we can always return and adjust the setting if we need to. Then we can go ahead and finish up by setting the subject to around a 75% opacity. Let's duplicate the subject, bringing the new layer above the original, and then setting that layer mode to Hard Light. Let's keep the opacity at 75%. Double-click the Hard Light duplicate and uncheck the R channel found under Advanced Blending. Nudge the layer over a few pixels to create a chroma RGB effect. Now we can add a layer mask to the Hard Light duplicate and fill it with black. We're going to mask back in the edges of the subject, as well as any defining features, in this case the folds in the sheet. You can come back and adjust this layer mask as needed. In fact, you'll likely have to adjust all of your future layer masks as we add more layers. So don't worry too much about masking at this stage, as we will be fiddling with each mask as we go. So let's duplicate the original subject layer again, bringing that new layer below the subject, and then setting the layer to Lighten at 100% opacity. We're going to go back to the original subject, add a layer mask, and then mask out any areas of the ghost we want to be see-through. In this case, we're going to mask everything but the pumpkin and the feet and grass area. Next, let's duplicate the light layer and bring it below its original. Setting the duplicate to Pin Light at 25% opacity. You won't notice any differences just yet. First, we're going to go back to our Lighten layer, add a layer mask, fill it with black, and then mask back in portions of the ghost. We don't want to mask things entirely back in, just enough to where we can kind of see them. That lower pin light layer will help retain any significant highlights. Once we're happy with our lighten layer's masking, we can duplicate the pin light layer, bringing it below its original, and then setting it to a 100% opacity. We're going to go ahead and flip the duplicate pin light layer horizontally, and then place that layer directly over the original ghost, making sure they align. This will add more form to the ghost as well as create a distorted effect. Once we have everything aligned, let's add a layer mask, and then mask out any unnecessary or redundant details. In this case, the pumpkin and the overly repetitive cloth folds. We can then finish up by creating a new layer above all of the current ghost layers, and then painting in some dripping black paint using either a default round brush or a grungy textured brush, just to add a bit more detail to the face, which will bring a bit of focus to that area. And then to bring even more focus to the ghost, as it's getting a little lost in the scene, let's add some extra detail to the pumpkin our ghost is holding by adding in some fire. Take a burning coal texture and shrink it over the pumpkin, setting that layer to either screen or lighten. Try out both and see which one works best. I preferred lighten for this particular texture, but sometimes screen is the way to go. You can use image adjust brightness contrast to adjust how bright the fire texture looks. In this case, I brought the brightness down to -77. And then we're going to want to mask out any parts of the texture we don't want to show, focusing the fire on the jack-o'-lantern's face. We can then repeat those same steps to add in some fire embers coming out of or around the pumpkin. Again, experiment with both the screen and lighten layer modes. For the embers, I ended up liking screen. And then duplicating a texture will cause it to appear brighter or more vivid. So I went ahead and did that for the embers. Let's finish up the fire by creating a new layer set to overlay and an opacity of around 80%. You can always lower this later on if you need to. And then we're going to paint some vivid orange glow coming off of the pumpkin and onto our ghost, just slightly. In fact, let's adjust the blend if settings so that the glow only affects the subject's highlights, not their shadow. We just want to bring a tiny bit of orange onto this ghost, nothing crazy, as I'm not even sure how reflections work on ghosts anyway. To add in some falling leaves, we'll be using these 3D assets from Envato Elements. Download a couple of different angles and then place them all over the image, placing them both behind and in front of the subject in varying different sizes. The leaves closer to the foreground should be larger than the background leaves. Once we're happy with our placement, we can then use a filter, blur gallery, field blur to add different depths to the leaves. Again, the leaves closer to the foreground should have more blur, while the leaves closer to the subject should have less. I do like to add a small amount of blur to most leaf layers, as even the in-focus leaves would have a slight amount of motion blur, which the field blur can kind of double as. Once we're happy with our blur settings, we can then use image adjustments brightness contrast to adjust some of the layer's lighting. Not all layers will need to be adjusted. Focus on darkening the leaves in the shadows and then adding some brightness to any of the leaves being hit by the sunlight. And then once we're happy there, we can finish up the leaves with some slight color adjusting using image adjustments, hue saturation. Adjust the hue just slightly as needed. Some leaves will need to lean redder, while others might need to lean more green. This step may not even end up being necessary depending on how and where you place your leaves. And to finish things up, we're going to create two curve layers right below our color grade group. One bringing up the highlights and the second bringing down the shadows. For the shadows curve, you'll also want to adjust the blend if settings. so they don't affect the image's highlights. We're going to fill both the curve layer masks with black. Now we can use both of these curve layers to add in some general lighting and shadowing. We're going to bring a small amount of light onto the subject to help bring focus to them, and then we're going to increase the shadows on the outer parts of the image, creating an almost vignette effect. For the lighting and shadows, I used a default soft round brush set to a very low flow rate. No higher than 25% and as low as 1%, especially if you're using a mouse. With the lighting done, we can select all of our layers and then right-click Convert to Smart Object. This will turn the whole image into one big smart object. Once our image is a smart object, let's go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. We're going to add a 35 grain with a -20 vignetting. Both of these settings are found under the Effects tab. Next, let's bring out that grain even more by adding a filter, Sharpen, Smart Sharpen. Setting the amount to 110%, and then the radius to 0.3. And for the image, I decided on a square crop using the crop tool. And that's it. That's how to fake a ghost photo in Photoshop. And remember, since we turned our whole image into a smart object, we can always just double-click, adjust our layers, save, and that smart object will update. No need to re-add the grain effect. If this wasn't enough and you're looking to learn even more, why not check out some of the other excellent videos that Envato Tuts Plus has to offer. If you liked this video and would like to see more, consider giving us a like and even subscribing if you haven't already. And don't forget to click the little bell icon to be notified of all new videos, including tips, tricks, and tutorials. Happy designing, see you next time.